Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining IFMA on our Wednesday webinar series. Today, we are going to be talking about to AI or not to AI. And before we get started, we'd love for you to just add in the chat where you are at currently. So I am sitting here in Cypress, Texas. I usually say Houston, Texas. Please let us know where you are coming in from. And we also want to encourage you to ask questions. So please post that. We have folks that are going to be watching that. It's going to be an amazing webinar. So the title itself is very Shakespeare, to AI or not to AI. Now, these are impacts and considerations for your building HVAC systems, and it's exploring whether AI is the right choice for elevating smart buildings. And joining us today as our moderator is Eddie Wagner. Eddie has over 30 years of experience in the real estate industry, including 2 decades of that as a technology executive. Now, Eddie, I know you serve as a tech evangelist for the industry, challenging and inspiring thinking on the intersection of the digital and physical workplace to help the broader corporate real estate industry make the most of their transformations. And I love something that is in your bio about what you do and that you challenge the status quo to create a better world through innovation and technology. And that's certainly something that I have seen as you and I have worked together over the last couple of years. And I'm really excited about this webinar. I think it's going to be an interesting conversation.
Thanks, Kim. I'm excited about it too. I'm excited to be back with IFMA, but I'm excited about the topic. If you know me really well, you know I love my air conditioning. Whether sweating after a tough budget meeting with the CFO, or after that cybersecurity meeting where we've discussed the latest threats, or even after a hot yoga session, I'm not sure I could live without air conditioning.
We
And
can't in
based
Houston. Mm-mm.
and based on the volume of calls that we get, hot and cold calls in many of our buildings that our facility managers receive, they know it's a building system that most tenants don't want to live without either. I've always thought of Trane as an air conditioning equipment company, but in prepping for this webinar, I've come to realize that Trane is actually a technology company. It has a focus on innovating and enhancing how they deliver, support, and enhance our health and well-being. And with the explosion of AI in our built environment, I'm beginning to think my air conditioner might actually become smarter than I am. Some of you would say that wouldn't be too difficult, but after today's session, you may think that too. Joining me today to discuss the implications of AI for your building HVAC systems are Brian Myers. He's a system control portfolio leader with Trane. And one thing I've discovered about Brian, he's not only a fun and engaging speaker, which I think can be really critical on understanding this topic, but he's also helped lead organizational change, which is really imperative with some of the changes that we're looking to bring into our facility management operations and into our organizations. Also joining us is Josh Mullen. He's a senior product manager with BrainBox AI. Now, quite often, us IT people can sometimes accidentally talk past building engineers, but I don't think you're going to find that with Josh because he's actually a mechanical engineer. So he understands both sides of the coin, if you will. And then finally, Christy Showmaker, the digital services commercialization leader with Trane. And as you hear Christy and see her or look at her LinkedIn, there's a passion and energy that she brings to the topic. And I discovered there's something else we have passion and energy about, and that's we're both Australian Shepherd owners. So Christy, as a fellow Australian Shepherd owner, let's see that passion and that energy in this presentation. So I'll hand it over to Christy to kick us off.
Yeah, thank you so very much. It is very exciting to be here, and we're gonna. And I don't know if we're gonna share our screen. We can probably get that up and going.
Perfect.
Yeah. So we're really excited to be here to talk about optimizing our buildings and systems. And at Trane Technologies, our mission is to boldly challenge what's possible for a sustainable world. And the theme you're going to hear today, if you go to the next slide, is that there's really no one size fits all approach, right? So as we think about, we're going to talk about different approaches, tools, applications, but most importantly, we're going to talk about outcomes and how ideally, if you reverse that, right, and we start with the outcomes, then it becomes easier for us to think about what tools and approaches to select. And as we also think about, was reflecting that we were at IFMA and did a similar discussion last October, IFMA World for Workplace in San Antonio. And what I was reflecting on is if AI was in the title of the breakouts and the discussions back then, they were 10 times more likely to be attended. And when the audience was asked several times, how familiar are you with AI? The majority, the consensus of the people said not familiar at all or still learning, which is not surprising, right? As we're all kind of in that learning curve. But as you think about, okay, so now here we are 5 months later, and I'm sure, there's a lot of you that may have attended the session. Where are you with your journey, since then? And I can imagine some of us have probably taken the steps to even just learn some of the general tools and, all the apps that we have at our disposal in our everyday life today. I know, or, let's take ChatGPT or your version of ChatGPT. I know I've even become a really much better note taker and how I prepare and conduct meetings since then. And so what we thought we would do to start out with is just start with the kind of the everyday uses of AI that we see in our life today. So, let's think of it as a game. Would you AI or would you not AI? So thinking about brushing your teeth, right? And so that's been something that we've been doing for, hopefully our entire lives, right? And hopefully every day. But did you know that there's 70% of us actually miss 30% of the most important parts of our teeth? So, now that you have an AI option here, right? Now you can actually get individual coaching. So think about if you're brushing too hard, and, even Eddie said, my nephew should probably have one that says, oh, you're brushing too hard, right? Or you can actually put in goals of hey, I want fresher gums, or I want healthier breath. And it can actually kind of coach you. And so that's kind of a question. Well, would you AI? You know how to do it. Does it help you? Does it help you do it better? Or we can go to another example. So take presenting, right? And so I want to think about how you prepare for a presentation. And the way we've always been taught is stand in front of a mirror and you're going to look at yourself and you're going to think it's silly, but you're going to just watch yourself talk to a mirror the whole time, right? Well, now think about, what if you had a simulated audience, right? That could actually feel like you're presenting in front of a conference, for example. And these people can actually, they can be engaging, they can look engaging, they can actually also be distracted. They can look at their watch or their phone, and they can actually ask real questions at the end based on the presentation you give, or switch that up and you're now in an interview room getting ready to do an interview, or getting ready to present to a board of directors, and it will look at your speech and things like that. This for me would be very helpful, right? I think I would AI in this particular case. Third example, think about, now this is definitely a me because I'm a just-in-time kind of person. But think about the last time you're in an airport and you're trying to get to your connecting flight and the gate's about ready to close. Or maybe you're just sightseeing and you've been on your feet all day. And so you have this new, these new shoes that are called moonwalkers, and they're designed to work with you, these sensors. So if you speed up, they actually, if you walk faster, they will speed up with you. And if you slow down, they will start resisting or even going downhill or steps. And so maybe there's a little bit of a fashion statement here, but another good example of would you AI? Would you AI if that was your chance to make that plane? I probably would do that. And then the last one, just for fun, is you think about French fries, right? And so I know you can actually go to the next slide. The Flippy, the fry station. I'm not sure if anyone has run into Flippy. You can find them at White Castle and I think Jack in the Box. So it's robots who are designed to make kind of these standard French fries and nuggets and onion rings. And not only are they designed to make the perfect French fries, what they told, but they're also designed to actually reduce food waste, which is really good for the environment. So these are just 4 quick examples before as we think about like, well, what's the purpose, right? I mean, to AI, right? But when you think about what does it actually do for our daily lives? Does it actually help improve how we are approaching whatever problem it is, or helping our daily lives? And now we're going to transition into buildings as we think about what do these technologies do when we think about optimizing buildings. I'm going to turn it to Brian to kind of look at AI and the definitions there.
Thanks, Christy. So Christy highlighted a couple of things here. She highlighted number one, right? The tech is here, right? There's new AI stuff seemingly popping up, every day, right? New applications. And number two, it's perhaps an overused buzzword, right? Everybody uses AI interchangeably. Are we talking about Terminator? Are we talking about HAL 9000? I'm sorry, I'm dating myself a little bit there. In reality, what we're seeing in a lot of applications, right, is what we would classify as narrow AI. It's not this artificial general intelligence where something is thinking for itself and deciding to take over humanity. It's something like IBM's Deep Blue chess engine, right? That doesn't have any concept of memory. It's just really efficient at portraying all of the possible moves and making the most efficient one next. Or as you expand a little bit and you add some memory into the mix, we can start to use past and present data to decide on a course of action that's going to give us the best outcome. Examples of that tech, right, are being seen every day, and Josh will talk about this a little bit more in buildings, whether it be ChatGPT, Gemini, Siri, right, regardless of how silly we think Siri or Alexa are, right, they don't always get things right, but they are very beneficial in a lot of applications. Self-driving cars are a great example. Christy happens to be in Las Vegas this week, and I believe there are autonomous taxis in Las Vegas in a couple of places, right? So this concept of hopping into a vehicle that doesn't have a driver, that is an example of AI. But with that being said, this is not new to the building space, right? Let's start with a couple of scenarios that we've been talking about for quite some time. The first is demand management, right? We can talk about proactive or reactive management of demand. Something as simple as setting a limit or a ceiling, right, to make sure I don't go after to incur demand charges, right, over the course of time. I can set a limit, I can define loads, and I can add or subtract as we approach that limit, right, all the way up to and including demand response signals, where a utility says use as little as possible or shed an amount of demand at a given time. That's been happening for quite some time. That's an example of a system that's a little bit dynamic. It is not entirely algorithmic. It is learning. It is looking at variables, right, and taking the appropriate next step. Another example here is balancing energy and comfort, right? If we have occupancy happening at 7 in the morning, 8 in the morning, we have folks coming in, they expect it to be 74 degrees and they expect it to be comfortable. And so one option we have is a couple of hours before, turning on the HVAC, bringing in fresh outdoor air, turning on the lights. Of course, it's going to be ready for those occupants when they get there, but it's wasteful, right? We really want to look at the identified time. We want to look at learned time and temp factors over time, and then we want to heat or cool only at the necessary time. That's a good solid balance of energy and comfort. We've been doing that for decades. As you start to think about emerging technologies, right, this is where things get really cool and we start to see new emerging things that drive really positive, beneficial outcomes. Those outcomes may be on the energy efficiency side. They may be on the operator productivity. Josh will talk a little bit about this with Aria later on. It could certainly impact positively equipment life cycles. You start looking at predictive maintenance, looking at inefficiencies or abnormal performance to identify issues, to identify problems before it reacts in one of those hot cold calls that Eddie talked about. Digital twin, you can see an example up above, right, where we've created a view that allows someone to visually represent or recognize their system and identify not just that there's a failure, but perhaps where in the system there's a failure and what part is needed to fix it. So those are emerging technologies that help with reducing downtime and improving efficiencies of break fix. Josh is going to talk quite a bit here about Trane Autonomous Control, which is powered by BrainBox later on, that helps us with operational improvements to the environmental space. And so I'm not going to steal much of Josh's thunder, but that's a good example of an emerging technology that is solely based on AI that is beneficial. So where do we start, right? The big provocation here that we want you to come away from, hopefully you're thinking about this every day, right, is not to necessarily chase the technology, right? And we want to start thinking about the outcomes. We want to start thinking about what actually drives business results, and then apply the technology as appropriate. We don't need to necessarily adopt the latest, greatest technology, especially if we've got controls that have been deployed in a facility over the course of the last 40 years. We may not have the ability to deploy all of these whiz-bang technologies without a significant capital expense. And so start with the end outcome as the provocation of the presentation and apply the technology that makes the most sense. And so if we think about a couple of scenarios here before we get into Josh's session section on artificial intelligence, I want to take a look at a couple of case studies. Take a look at a university campus. You can see this is a location in the mid-Atlantic. Building's about 50 plus years. You can imagine the equipment and the controls that are in this facility over that several decade span. They had a number of goals. They wanted to be carbon neutral by 2050. They wanted to reduce their BTUs by about 25% per square foot. And then ultimately, right, because this in many cases comes back to money, they wanted to reduce their utility budget by $1 million per year. And so as they looked at this, they had a couple of options in front of them on the control side, right? They had a lot of pneumatic controls, not really great at providing the data and control that's necessary to implement some of these advanced strategies. And so they could replace those and put in a BAS to help. They could rework the HVAC system design, replace all the aging equipment, get some equipment that's more efficient, maybe add ice tanks on top of the chiller system, right? That certainly was an option in front of them. A last option that they had was to leverage renewables and performance contracting, right? To look at utilizing that $1 million of savings to actually pay for some of the upgrades that are necessary to improve the new efficiencies. And so ultimately, right, in this particular case, they settled on a balance of all three. They settled on a balance of improving the mechanical equipment, focusing on the items that were closest to the end of life, right? So they didn't have to take on new additional capital expenditures that they weren't planned for or hadn't budgeted for. They did replace the pneumatic controls with digital, and then they applied optimizations, many of the optimizations that are available to them with building automation systems. Things like occupancy-based scheduling, right? It's not on by time of day, it's on as folks enter the space. Airside optimization, power monitoring, and fault detection. The end results here, they landed on about $280,000 per year. I apologize, that $1 million was not per year. That $1 million was overall. $280,000 per year. And ultimately, right, they got to a very solid payback. They were looking at less than 4 years payback on that overall expenditure, which included a refresh on all of the equipment. Second case study here is on a casino and a hotel. Now, this is an environment that is focused on uptime, right? Much like a lot of other vertical markets, the efficiency is great, but it can't come at an expense of guest comfort. It can't come at an expense of people being satisfied and happy. And so they were looking at a total retrofit and expansion of the hotel and casino. They wanted to leverage technology, and they also had heard about this AI, kind of wave, right? And had a little bit of FOMO. They started with a specification that said, "Thou shall implement AI technologies." Certainly an option, right? That is a possibility. However, a second alternative, if you start to look at this, is to utilize pre-programmed optimization sequences as well as connected systems, a smarter connected system, to implement without having to completely start from scratch on that AI front. Ultimately, we put in place two different options for that customer. One option that included chiller optimization strategies that have been deployed over decades, some consultative services that ultimately delivered significant upfront and annual savings versus what they had specified. Ultimately, the option is up to the customer, right? What do they balance, and is it today? Is it tomorrow? Is it 5 years from now? But they put in place a good solid set of options with modeling to show the expected payback over time. And the owner ultimately is looking at that, identifying the right path forward, right? There is no right answer here. Both are viable options, but we can present both different options and allow the customer to take the appropriate action. So with that, I'm going to pass things over to Josh for the next handful of slides.
And before
Yeah.
Josh starts, let me just remind our audience, you can drop questions in the chat. We're going to have a Q&A at the end. But if you're like me, as Josh talks, a lot of questions are going to come up. So feel free to put them in. If it's something pertinent, I'll interrupt Josh and ask it right then. Otherwise, we'll get to as many as we can at the end. So with that, Josh, looking forward to your part of the presentation.
Yeah, thanks, Eddie. So I'm here to talk about AI applications and machine learning applications in the built environment. As I begin, I want to stress that AI and machine learning applications in buildings is limited only to the amount of use cases you can dream up. So as I dive into the specific use cases, they are BrainBox focused, but I want to just stress that it is not limited to that. Think anything that is a process that leverages data, you can apply AI and machine learning to automate it. And I want to hit on what Brian mentioned. AI adoption is not the end goal, right? It is merely a tool that can help meet your business objectives. And then, next slide, Brian, thank you. I also want to hit on that any AI or machine learning outcomes are only as good as the underlying data that it leverages. I had a professor in college who would always say, it's inefficient to infer reality from its shadows. And what he was saying is, like, if you don't have the proper data to work on, you're never going to get the right outcome. So you really want to focus on, one, what is your use case? And then two, what are your data needs to meet that use case? And next slide. At BrainBox, we specifically are working to optimize building operations by leveraging advanced technology. And we sort of feel that building operations are inefficient because of two distinct areas. And really, they're two sides of this same coin. It's the energy side and the maintenance side. And on the energy side, a lot of waste is from inefficient control sequences. So we have an autonomous AI offering that really works on optimizing and leveraging machine learning to optimize those control sequences. And then on the physical maintenance side, there's a lot of time inefficiencies spent on sifting through a bunch of data, looking at the myriad of different workflows and combining them into one coherent troubleshooting effort. So Aria is our AI agent and LLM that really focuses on workflow automation. And I will dive into each side, and I'll first focus on autonomous AI, which is our HVAC optimization. So again, it all starts with the data. And to get that data, we need to connect to the buildings. So we are connecting to the building control system. We're sending that data up to our cloud every 5 minutes. We're marrying it with granular weather data. So think drywall temperature, dew point, cloud coverage, sun angle, and sun intensity. We're also pulling in the utility tariff structures and the grid emission rates. And when available, we pull in the occupant data, be it from Google Popular Times or CO2 sensors that are a proxy for it, or people counters themselves. And we pull this information in, and we also augment it with space temperature predictions. And these space temperature predictions are used by some of our algorithms to optimize the control sequences. So what our algorithms do is they compare how the building is operating every 5 minutes and leverage those machine learning predictions and those space temperature predictions to see how the building should be operating. And then if there is a difference, it writes back to the control set points to push those pieces of equipment into different operating regimes and more efficient regimes. And then a deeper dive into what we need to make those predictions. We'll start with the inputs. So for the inputs, as I mentioned, we need granular weather data. We're pulling in third-party data because, as everyone knows, the building level space temperature prediction, or the building level outside air temperature, is often lacking calibration, especially if you look at the equipment level. And then we're pulling in the telemetry data from the BMS. We're cleaning that, we're cleaning all the data, we're normalizing it, we're associating those data points with pieces of equipment and how those pieces of equipment tie into systems. And then we're pushing all this information into our deep learning models. For the past year or two, we've been really leveraging neural ODEs, or neural nets, and ordinary differential equations, because it's the combination of physics and statistics that are really allowing us to get a highly accurate and robust model that needs a very limited window of time to become calibrated and useful. And from that, we have an output, and that output is an individual space temperature prediction 1 to 6 hours ahead. And we use those outputs into our algorithms, as I mentioned. And on the next slide, I'll go over just one of many algorithms that leverages space temperature predictions. And it is our algorithm that is really focused on the transient periods of the building. So in particular, optimum start and optimum stop of equipment and systems. So we use those space temperature predictions to inform when and what pieces of equipment we should stage on in the morning and what pieces of equipment we should stage off at night, based on how we know, based on machine learning, how quickly it recovers and what the space temperature is expected to be when the equipment turns on. And, as Brian mentioned, optimum start and optimum stop have been around since the 80s, if not even longer. Brian will know, he's the controls guru on the call. But we have found that we can improve upon most optimum start and stop algorithms by reducing runtime and energy consumption for those particular windows of time 10 to 15%. And then we'll talk about the AI agents, or the generative workflow AI applications. So as mentioned before, it's all about the data. As you look to leverage your workflows, you need to look at what data is available and what data can be used by a machine. So if your work order data is all over the place and people don't fill out important parts of it and pieces of information, we really can't leverage it in a way, or an LLM can't leverage it in a way that is useful. So workflow examples are asset information. We'll pull it in. Telemetry data. We want to marry that real-time data with the asset information, with your workflow information, with your parts information. If you're up on a roof trying to repair a part, you want to be able to look at the past, few days and also know what parts to order and what parts are handy. AFDD information. If pieces of equipment have onboard errors and fault codes, we want to know what the troubleshooting information is for them and then what they mean. And then we finally want all the O&M manuals to be able to be at a technician's fingertips. And if you pull all of this in, you don't have to pull it all, but if you do pull it all in, you can start leveraging this in a useful way with an LLM. So in order to do that, first you need a foundational knowledge. And we leverage Amazon Bedrock. There's plenty out there, think ChatGPT, think others. you want to access tools with it. So little AI agents that are highly specialized. So if you want to graph something and you want it to graph the same way every time, if you want it to do a smart search of your database to pull up historic information in an optimized way, you want to have special little tools that like really focus on that instead of generalized tools. And then you also want to have human in the loop tools. So you want humans to be able to give it feedback in case it does not give you a proper answer or unsatisfactory answer. And you want to always have the final say if you want to modify set points and schedules in your building. And finally, you want it to have access to knowledge-based resources. Think those O&M manuals or the work order data or the parts information. And then as you tie all that in, you can do a lot with it. So on the next slide, here's an example of several different iterations that ARIA can do. One, it can do scope 1 and 2 reporting and have it at your fingertips. It can assist with troubleshooting of hot and cold calls and fault detection. And it can also assist in modifying set points and schedules. And then, since we've been in business for around 6 years, and we are in the business of digitizing and leveraging machine learning and artificial intelligence, we have learned to meet the client where they are on their digitization journey. Every client is at a different stage, and we need to be flexible. So, you know, we love OEM cloud-to-cloud integrations. We were partnered with Trane for many years before we were acquired, and it just is a seamless integration from their control system to our cloud. We have a Niagara driver. Lots of clients have Tritium Niagara. We have BACnet drivers and Modbus drivers. A lot of multi-site retail don't have BMSs, so we need to be able to have the ability to have wireless thermostats sync up with our cloud so we can control and optimize the buildings that way, or have a lightweight BMS for them. And then once you have this data, you can start to control and manage your portfolio as a whole. And then furthermore, you can start to optimize it using machine learning and artificial intelligence married with optimization algorithms. And now Christy will walk through the real life use cases of autonomous control.
Actually, before Christy jumps in, I'm going to jump in because we've got a lot of questions that came in. Josh, I'm going to take advantage of having you on camera. Got to put the readers on here to be able. So great question came in from Eva saying, have you encountered AI hallucinations already?
Yeah, I mean, anyone who is building out an AI agent or an LLM applications will encounter these, right? Because it's basically a bell curve, and it's seeing what is the most logical word after it. However, we work really, really hard to enforce guardrails and guide rails to ensure that it stays on task. It is only referencing HVAC information and that our answers are consistent. So I talked about those tools, and we really focus on creating these tools to get a consistent and accurate answer for it. So like, you don't want an LLM doing math over and over again. You want to create a tool that leverages like a stats program or math calculations in the background and then retrieves an accurate answer for you.
Let me ask another one. Gary Dietrich asked, how do you stop the system from hunting? If reviewed every 5 minutes, are there parameters around allowable increments of pushing back changes of points and parameters of only X changes in period Y, or?
Yeah, absolutely. So we're pulling in information every 5 minutes, but we're not writing back every 5 minutes. We're writing back when we need to. And think of it as like a trim and respond algorithm as well. Like those deck static pressure and supplier temperature resets for VAV systems, right? Those are sitting on top of an existing PID loop on the controller level, and they're writing back and they're checking in the information, and they're operating in the same sense. So we're always looking to limit cycling. We have algorithms specifically for limiting the cycling of staging of equipment. So it might run stage 1 longer than turning on stage 2 for a little bit of time. And we're also taking into account that we don't want this bouncing. People want a uniform, comfortable space.
2 more quick questions. Actually, one's a comment. David Reynolds asked a great question, and then he said he thought you answered it. So David, there's more to that. If you'll put it back in the comments, I'll re-ask it. But then a question that I had, since I've got the microphone, I get to ask my question. You always think about these systems historically being closed. And as I've heard you guys present, you're talking about all these integrations with different data sets and different systems. So I just want to be sure that, I need to change my thinking. Is this a closed system, or are you truly able to integrate across systems and data sets and other technologies that may be in some of the buildings?
Yeah, and Brian is the controls expert on the call. I just play one on TV. But for the most part, BACnet is a open protocol, and as long as it is speaking BACnet communications, we can connect to it and communicate to it. Modbus is a little trickier, and this is a question that might go down a rabbit hole, so I'll try to keep it brief. But with BACnet, you have a priority array, and we can leverage the priority array to make sure that our commands persist and that we can null out our commands if we ever need to. With Modbus, there isn't necessarily that same priority array, so it makes the persistence of our commands a little bit trickier.
Excellent. Christy, we're going to go to you next. I've got more questions coming in, and I'll get to those toward the end, but let's continue with the presentation. Christy.
Yeah, great. Thanks so much for that explanation. I think hopefully that gives the audience a little bit more understanding of how our technology works on the AI side. And again, they're not all apples to apples, right? And so we just went through a couple of scenarios where maybe AI wasn't the right approach for the customer, right? And now that we know a little bit more about the technology, we're going to talk about a couple of examples where it ended up being the right example and what helped us make that decision. So our first one is a life sciences client, and when we, they're in the business of collecting plasma. And it's all around in different climates and geography. So there's a lot to consider, but a lot of the locations are very similar in nature. And as we started thinking through what's the right approach for them, we first started with the outcome, right? Well, they actually had aggressive sustainability goals. And part of that was 40% reduction in GHG emissions by 2025 and being net zero by 2035. So when we started these conversations, this was, several years ago, when we were coming up to, hey, what do we do? We're already in 2025, guys. So we did look at, hey, do we need to look at optimizing, changing out, replacing? And I think if you go to the next slide, that's where we really started looking at it. But the fact is when we really looked at, hey, okay, let's take the phased approach of replacing over time. Well, they can always still go and buy RECs at the end, right, to get to their goal. But that wasn't what they wanted to do. Their overall mission was to do the right thing in the spirit of their sustainability mission. And so with that, we said, hey, this is probably a really good opportunity to really scale the solution quickly and effectively. And when you are able to, let's say, pilot a couple of ones and understand, hey, this is the types of results that we can anticipate. And then now you can spread it over to multiple locations. And if you go to the next slide, it kind of shows what that looked like over time. So a lot of us are probably familiar with EUI, energy use intensity. And if you're not, it's kind of simple. Like if you follow the line going down, that's good, and going up is bad, right? So that means you're using and consuming more energy over time. We got to do, because we were looking at, we started with one facility and we kind of grew over time. We were able to see the difference of, hey, when we have one facility running and we're applying the AI on it, what's happening with the energy usage and the operational efficiency of the building? It gets better, right? So we're reducing the consumption, the efficiency is getting better. And the buildings that did not have AI on it started consuming more energy over time. So this was a really good case study to say, hey, this really worked well for this client. Happy to say that they have, I think I've read that they have reached their first goal, and now they're on their way to that 2035 goal. So that was a really kind of cool pilot project to work with them on. And then the next opportunity that we have here is Santikos Entertainment. So everyone's been in the movie theaters, right? This is a really interesting case study in that Santikos they're very community driven. And in fact, a lot of when the owner passed away, most of their profits actually go through a charity and then back into the community. So they have to run their facilities much different than one might expect in a private sector. Move forward. So, and they actually just expanded their portfolio. They started in San Antonio and actually the kind of major Texas area, and now they have 27 locations. So the interesting thing about Santikos is we actually did a lot of replacements, and we were working with them to kind of get their equipment back up to a really good operating system. And energy wasn't the huge driver, right, for them. As you can imagine, one of them is comfort. And, the owner the CEO would say that, hey, comfort is really important for our guests. But we want them to be, but it's also good to be a little chilly because we sell blankets and, and that's also a revenue generating opportunity there. But all jokes aside, comfort is a must there. But then you think about like the cyclical nature of the theater industry, right? Is that it goes up and down with major blockbuster releases. So being able to have the technicians on site and the skill sets and the cyclical nature was a huge kind of consideration in here. And I think just a couple of comments I remember is, when we decided to try AI on this, it's to help that. So it was more about the operational efficiency. So if, let's say, for example, a technician is on site, it could be 120 degrees out there on that rooftop. And any opportunity we can get to get technicians and their field, their field people, like off of those rooftops is a good thing, right? And there's a lot of other things that they can focus on versus the HVAC equipment themselves. So this was a really good way to look at, hey, how do we look at this portfolio and be really considerate of not relying on the labor it takes to keep these machines running at optimal level. And I think if you go to the next slide, there's probably a couple where we were. So again, we got the buildings kind of up to where they need to be. And then we started looking at cool opportunities of like, how do we integrate this with, when people are buying the ticket integration, right? How many people are going to be in the theaters? How do we manage the load that way? And eventually, being able to troubleshoot issues faster and remotely. And I'll tell one more thing before we finish is when we decided to implement AI, it was on the day that Deadpool was released. So could you imagine that? That's like a big consideration of like, oh my gosh, do we do it? Do we not? He had a conversation with all the people, that were supporting the building that worked for them, and they all said, hey, let's do it, but we want to have a kill switch, right? So if something doesn't feel right, we can basically push a button and everything goes back to normal. And we were able to work with them to make sure that happened. Everything went smoothly. So that was a very good test case. And now that we're there, right, and we're seeing the benefits, is we're seeing some savings too, right? But operational efficiency was their primary concern. And now we're starting to look at the rest of the facilities and say, how do we then scale from building to building? And so that's generally kind of our high level chat. I'm excited to answer, for us to answer some questions, but as you think about, okay, just because we can brush our teeth, right, doesn't mean we need AI or have to use AI. But it's just super important to think about what's the actual goals that we're trying to achieve, because we could have tried to use AI in all 4 of those scenarios, but it wasn't right for the customer at the right time. So you really need to think about what the technology, like familiarize yourself with the technologies out there, right? Because again, they're not apples to apples. And understanding, okay, well, let's say that we really want the flexibility. Well, what does that entail? How does it, give me some examples, talk to your peers that are using technologies like this. And we're excited to have these conversations with you as well as we think about your buildings and managing them in the future. And then I'll pass it over to Eddie to kind of help moderate some questions for the group.
Awesome. Thanks, Christy, so much. And keep those questions coming in as we ask some. I'm inspired too by a comment David Reynolds just made. This is not just about office buildings. This is about every building, the technology that we're talking about. And David, someday I would love to hear about the cathedral nave and the complexities of managing that type of real estate. Another place in church where I like to stay cool and not feel the heat. Topic for another conversation. Let's get into some of the questions now. A question that came in from David Katz. When providing a building's data to BrainBox and 2 other AI systems, they all come back with different savings and costs. How do boards decide which to try? And I can throw that out to everybody, and we'll give an award to David if he asks the question that trips us all up.
No, I answered a bunch of questions. So Brian and Christy, do you want to take a stab at this?
Or you might have to answer it again, or Brian, if you, yeah.
I'm fine handling it. So I think it's really taking stock in what outcomes you want, seeing if the proposals are getting you those outcomes, and then seeing what those costs are of those proposals, and then handling it like any other built environment proposal, right? The board just addresses it as, 1, does it give me the desired outcome? And 2, is it cost effective? And that's how you make your decision from there.
I think too, if I could add just from a CIO perspective, and you guys shake your heads yes or no if I'm right or wrong, AI is not replacing us humans. So the fact that different platforms are giving different answers, it's just like every day where different people give you different opinions and feedback and whatnot. We still have to look at it and make an informed decision about the direction we're going to go. So I don't believe AI will replace all of us. It's just going to make things faster. It may give us better data, but we're still going to need to make some decisions based on that. And that's where I think the facility managers that are paying attention and starting to work with AI will have a foot up for themselves and their companies because they're leveraging that better information.
Yeah, and maybe I'll add to that. Like, if you think about how many of us out there have a ton of deferred maintenance, right? Or just like the calls keep coming in and there's never enough time to get to, and this is probably all of us in all of our lives, right? I mean, the demands of how and why and how we need to manage our time and decisions we need to make are only growing over time. So when you think about looking at this, does it help us make those decisions easier, faster, more effective? And let's just go back to Santikos example, prime example where, you know, our systems are becoming more sophisticated as we grow. That's not their, you know, they're only going to get more sophisticated. So when you're thinking about, hey, I only have X amount of people to service X amount of theaters, where best do I need them? And where can I alleviate so they can go focus on the, you know, the things that are also going to help occupant comfort, get people, you know, in the theaters safely, right? And just all the things that go around that. So there's some considerations of how much we're asking our employees to do in a day, and the tools that can help make that a little easier as we go.
Christy, while I've still got you a microphone online, let me ask a question that Mohammed asked. How do you envision the implementation of AI and managing soft services?
Well, my first question would be is like, what's your definition of a soft service? Because it feels like is AI for just about everything out there. I mean, I think someone said the other day that like litter boxes for cats have AI in there, or in and sorry, I might not be answering the question, but I know my father asked, for Christmas, I was going to get him one of those things that like cooks the perfect steak. And then I heard him say, no, I would never want something like that. I can, cook my own perfect steak. I'm like, did not buy that for his, thank goodness I heard that. But I don't really know the answer, because I think we're all trying to understand like how to use these things in our everyday life. And at you have the opportunity to get kind of overwhelmed with them. And when you're thinking about, hey, what are the most influential things that you do during your day, your specific day, and the decisions you need to make, then how do you kind of do your own research, right, to understand what technologies to use through that. But if there's specific soft services that you want to talk about, happy to go into more detail.
You're just a LinkedIn message away. Brian, let me bring you back, because I know as a CIO, when I say, oh, it's an open system, you and I both know, the devil can sometimes be in the details. So share a little bit more about the open systems and information or what you'd like to share with the audience.
Yeah, thank you for the question. So there's a couple things that go into that, right? First and foremost, the definition of open, right, is a little bit subjective depending on the audience that you're having, right? Are we talking about the protocols? Are we talking about the distribution, right? All of that comes down to risk, right? And from a facility standpoint, you don't want to be locked in. You want to make sure that you can take best in class at any given time. But you also have the constraints of what is in my facilities over the course of the last 30 to 40 years, right? And so as we think about open, I might be stuck with something that was deployed 30 years ago. I might have the privilege of having a greenfield installation where I get to start over, but that's dependent on the facility. It's depending on the environment every day. I will say that this landscape is changing dramatically, right? As you think about what an open protocol is, right? As BACnet has kind of become a de facto open protocol within the industry for quite some time, that isn't as accepted when you get to some of the cloud service providers, right? You start talking about web services and the Internet of Things and semantic tagging with Project Haystack and some of those types of things. And so it's important to understand the risks, the concerns of the owner. I saw in the chat, right, isn't the answer always the lowest price? And while that guides many decisions, right, it isn't always the right answer for owners and facility managers. And so the important part, I would say, about that open discussion is to have the conversation, to focus on the outcomes, and to hedge against any risks or concerns ultimately that you have, and be really open and transparent about those. I think that leads to the best outcome.
Excellent. Christy, I'm going to ask you a question to bring us home. Questions from Raphael. Are there any cases of integration with energy modeling tools to compare or guide building performance?
Yeah, I'll start with that. Maybe Brian can, or others can chime in. One thing that we, as Trane, we try to stay very closely aligned with ASHRAE guidelines or industry standards like Energy Star, for example. Some of that, you think about integration. Well, some of that is just understanding primarily like what is the industry standard, right? And so when you think about if we know that, And then we have the tools that can say, hey, where are we at a building? And that can come in a lot of different forms, right? So we are connected to the assets. We either have utility bills. Utility bills can be the easiest way to get started. And I think with the integration piece, I mean, you can access those things today very easily. The integration piece is, well, how do you want to look at it and how do you want to see it? Right. And, that's primarily like our starting place is what is the opportunity? What does a good design building look like? And how do we then say, okay, well, for example, if we have chillers connected, right, and we're looking at the number of starts that a chiller has, and we can now in our system, right, compare that to the lifespan of a chiller, then does that inform us a little bit more about, hey, when should we be thinking about potential replacement versus ongoing kind of maintenance and improvement over time? So we use those things, but we try to keep it very standard to the guidelines that are out there today and the way we visualize the data to compare and evaluate that. And then, Brian or Josh, if there's other additional comments you want to add on top of that, that would be wonderful.
In the interest of time, we're right up against the hour. I don't think I want to expand significantly on what you just said. You hammered it pretty well. The one thing that I will say is a lot of this idea of autonomous automation is relatively new, right? And so the idea of proof points is really important, right? Where have you deployed not just what a modeling is versus XYZ baseline, right? That gives us an idea, but the proof points that Josh started to show in a few of the case studies, actually, I believe you showed, Christy, in a few of the case studies, right, are really important. Not only what I can expect, but what has been delivered in similar environments is going to continue to be really important over time as folks understand and become more comfortable with this new technology. So I'll leave it with that and turn it back to you, Eddie.
Thanks, guys. 3 quick notes as we come to closing. If you registered for the webinar, you're going to get some collateral, copies of the slides that we used, copy of the recording. So be sure that you watch for an email from IFMA. Also, engage with IFMA on its platforms. I'm going to just share, I was watching where different people were coming from. There's no real estate group better globally connected than IFMA. In addition to the US, which we kind of always expect on these webinars, we've got guests from Brazil, Turkey, Canada, Israel, India, Saudi Arabia, Slovenia, Trinidad, Dubai, Tanzania, Nigeria, and Swaziland. You can't go anywhere and get this, so I encourage you to engage. If you liked what you heard here and want to kick the tires a little more, Trane will be at World Workplace. Not only that, they're offering a tour of one of their facilities, and those tickets are limited. So be sure to register early. And then, if you're thinking about AI in your building systems, you don't have to sweat the details because you've got teams like Christy, Brian, and Josh that are here ready to help you think through the right solution for you and for your buildings. On behalf of the team here, thank you for joining us today. Christy, Josh, Brian, thank you for sharing your expertise. And thank you to our audience. We'll see you on the next IFMA webinar.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you all.
Thank you.